The Short Life of a Galvanized Yankee, A Tale of Desertion by Gary Ives, read by Gary Ives. The poster read, "Hark! Call to arms! Amnesty for former rebels now incarcerated who are qualified and approved for service and who swear the oath of allegiance to the United States of America. 1 year enlistments in the Union Army, full pardon granted upon acceptance. Serve the Union." Could anything be worse than this? On his 18th birthday, Sandy Immelman sat on a bench outside the provost's office, waiting to be interviewed by the recruiting sergeant. What was there to lose? There was nothing back home. Hell, he didn't give a shit about the damn war. He'd volunteered to escape the drudgery of his father's savage temper and the misery of working at the old man's sawmill. And now there was this matter, and the matter of the lawmen back home. Once the war was over, and he'd have to bear the stigma of desertion. He had not had a decent meal in over a year. Days spent popping lice between his thumbnails, waiting for thin rations of watery soup and weevily hardtack while he stood guard over his blanket. Made signing up for 1 year in the Yankee Army out west as welcome as a band of angels. The recruiting sergeant relit his cigar and continued the interview. "Mr. Immelman, after you enlisted in the Arkansas Volunteers, you were at the siege of Vicksburg and the surrender. The Union granted amnesty to everybody at Vicksburg, so how'd you come to end up here at Rock Island Prison?" Immelman spoke slow and quiet. "That's right, sir. The whole bunch of us started marching down to Vicksburg day after we enlisted. See, it wasn't that we was beat down, not from fighting, no. Fact of the matter is, sir, I've yet to see a fight. Just the siege. No, sir, it was lack of rations whipped us. By the time of the surrender, all of us was just skin and bones. Wasn't a dog nor cat left in Vicksburg, and I dare say nary a rat nor mouse. Then, instead of feeding and transporting 30,000 prisoners of war, General Grant reckoned the smartest thing was to have each rebel soldier sign a pledge, guaranteeing not to fight no more against the Union. You're right, sir. It was a general amnesty for all of us. Our officers told us, sign the damn papers and let us be gone out of here. Took 2 weeks to get all them signatures, and for all them 2 weeks we ate good Yankee rations. Hardtack, salt pork, and real coffee. Then when the papers was finally signed and we collected, we was ordered to stack arms. The Yanks give each man half a loaf and 1 ration of salt pork and sent us on our way as merry as can be. Maybe a feller had to be there to believe it. It was almost friendly. Our old units formed up and our officers began marching us east. We was headed some to Mobile and some to Biloxi. But then, like fleas hopping off a dead cat, fellers commenced to fall out, and I mean right off. We hadn't marched 3 miles when one of my messmates, Jonas Switt from Ireland, he breaks off to relieve himself in the bushes, never to be seen no more. Then another boy named Billy Dew, he did the same thing. And that very same idea had come down upon the ranks, it did, like a thick fog. Pretty soon our captain halts us, and he give it to us straight, that any attempts to desert would be fatal. General Grant had allowed the officers to keep their sidearms and horses. Holding up his pistol, he says, "Don't make me bloody my saber should I run short of bullets." Maybe all the piss and vinegar was gone out of the troops, but the officers was still very much for the cause and hell-bent to get us back into the fray. To hell with the Yankee pledge papers. However, they had scarce means of halting the columns to pursue hundreds and maybe thousands of deserters. Me, I took French leave the second night as soon as dark fell. Walking west most of the night. I was going to work my way back to the river. Find a way downstream to the Gulf, and then Mexico, or maybe crew on some foreign ship. I slept under a blanket of sweet-smelling red cedar shavings at a small sawmill. In the morning, a Negro seen me crossing a cotton patch to get to a thicket of cypress, and he commenced at hollering his fool head off. I figured he was yelling for the home guard, but within an hour of leaving that sawmill, I was took prisoner by your Yanks. And I don't mind telling you, sir, there was a bevy of us, hundreds and hundreds of us from Vicksburg who had deserted only to be captured and thrown in the Yank stockade and kept there the rest of the year. Then in the middle of winter, they steamed us upriver on paddle wheelers here to Rock Island. And a god-awful place it is, too. And I reckon you know that. The recruiter came to the point. Well, soldier, you've read the bulletin, and you know that President Lincoln has extended this officer of complete amnesty in exchange for a 1-year enlistment in the Union Army. You former Rebs will be signed to Western units. You will not fight in the South. Sign up, soldier, and you could be dressed in blue in the barracks tomorrow night with a full tobacco pouch and beer in your belly. You've read the bulletin. Swearing in will be in the morning. By the next afternoon, Immelman and 126 other volunteers became Galvanized Yankees and swore allegiance to the Union and to the President and officers appointed over them, enlisting for a term of 1 year in Company B, 3rd United States Volunteer Infantry. Immelman's friend, Ben McGrath, said, I was so damn low I could reach up and touch bottom. Hell, I'd have signed up for a bar of soap and a plug of baccy. Their clothes were burned and their heads shaved as part of the delousing regimen before they were issued new woolen uniforms and boots. A week later, their captain spoke to the officers and sergeants of Company B, 3rd U.S. Volunteer Infantry. We board the train in the morning. At St. Louis, we'll take on commissary stores, weapons, and ammunition. We'll be drawing 150% rations with a wagon and 2 teams of mules. The Rock has left these men puny, and I want some meat on their bones. So, quartermaster, you'll issue 1.5 rations per man per day, till otherwise instructed. We'll detrain at St. Joseph. The overland march to Fort Kearny will be off the trail so as to season up these Reb troops. Our mission in the Nebraska Territory will be to protect the mail routes and keep those routes and the telegraph lines open. The Cheyenne are tough, mighty tough, so you will drill your troops. Now you know, and I know, that these Rebs have enlisted to get the hell off of Rock Island. I can't say as I blame them. Try to understand their situation. I don't know how many are going to try to make a run for it, but sure as shit it's going to happen, and when it does, we've got to make an example of every deserter. That means you are to use any force available to halt a deserter. Tell your sergeants and corporals to shoot if they have to. We'll court-martial any bastard brought in. It's wartime. Punishment will be swift and severe. Let's hope it doesn't become a problem. In the cattle cars, men remained quiet, save the rhythm of the wheels against the rails. Men mulled individually over their situations, tobacco smoke and sweat permeating the air filled with guilt. Enlisting in the Union Army was an anathema back home in a land that was being squeezed to death like a rat in the coils of a black snake. Atlanta, Richmond were lost, and still Lee would not give in. The Union had tried to negotiate prisoner exchanges, but every time the talks had ended with the Confederates walking away from the table while tens of thousands languished in the hellholes like St. Albans and Rock Island, not to mention the poor bluebellies starving to death in the southern camps. So stupid, so insane. Just about every rebel prisoner at Rock Island now regarded the war as a miserable and tragic folly. Only a very small clutch of diehards held on to the initial fervor of the succession. Lee had even turned down a 3-hour truce in Tennessee for both sides to recover their wounded, leaving hundreds dying just yards away from relief. and rumors held that the Yanks would make the South pay dearly for the massacre of the Negro soldiers at Fort Pillow. No, there would be no hurry to release prisoners come the end of the war. Might be years before their release. The North had used prisoners as pawns to squeeze the South and exact further punishment. Loyalty to the South? Over half the men in the new V Company had deserted their units. Therefore, home was not an option for most. And Lincoln's amnesty offer came ever so welcome. Could anything be worse than the hell that was Rock Island Prison Camp, with the gangs, the lice, the filth, and hunger? Amnesty after the war, full rations, boots, a clean uniform, order and service in the West. The idea was like manna from heaven. Even before the war, the West had held wonder and allure for men all over the world. Vast tracts of land were there for the asking and fortunes waiting to be made. This was the West. There was nothing in the South. The West offered a new start, hope. At St. Joe, the troops detrained and made camp beside the depot for one night to begin the 200-mile overland march to Fort Kearny the next morning. Marching off the trail, the captain's mind was to coalesce and harden his company. Full rations and constant discipline on the march could lift the dreariness of defeat, capture, and imprisonment, and could hopefully restore his men. How the shift in allegiance affected them, he had no notion as yet, but was mindful and would observe. He had instructed the lieutenant and the sergeants that he wanted every man treated as a soldier, firm and fair, but also to be mindful that these men had been weakened by imprisonment, and aside from any attempted desertions, to be judicious in punishments on the trek. We're leaving St. Joe with prisoners. When we get to Fort Kearny, I want soldiers. The first was a Choctaw from Mississippi named Long Charlie. Long Charlie was gone ere Company B heard reveille at St. Joe. Vanished. The captain filed a report of desertion with the U.S. Marshal before the march began. The returned deserter earned a $50 bounty. Each of the 3 privates who had shared the tent with Long Charlie got 3 lashes in front of the company for complicity. Somewhere near Marysville Trading Post, 2 men slipped out of ranks as the company forded a stream. When they failed to show up for muster, a search party was unable to pick up their tracks. The column continued without them the next day. That afternoon, 2 Kiowa scouts rode alongside the column, the captured deserters in tow. One, bound by the ankles, was dragged along. The other, bound by his wrist, ran until he fell. From the saddle, the scout snapped a bullwhip until he was on his feet to repeat the run and stumble. The man who'd been dragged died before sundown, and the other faced a court-martial by lantern light, lying on a cot before the captain's tent. Next morning, the troops were formed up to witness his execution. The poor man was too weak and broken from the dragging ordeal to stand and had to be carried and set on a camp stool to be shot. Color Sergeant read the article and stepped aside, then signaled the drummer, who began a tattoo. The man, Willoughby, his head hung, chin touching his chest, wept and then puked into his lap as the color sergeant slipped the feed sack over his head. The impact of the ball knocked him backwards, where he lay twitching and moaning for less than a minute. Immelman recoiled. The circumstances of his enlistment in the Union Army with its full rations and good boots had softened his opinion of the former enemy. Captain seemed decent enough, and no one had mistreated him as yet. However, the execution weighed heavily. He saw the captain's predicament, but Immelman knew desertion. Halfway to Fort Kearny, the company encamped for a week of drills. Close order drills, marching, lines of skirmish drills, bayonet drills, and weapons training. Everything Yankee was better. Their gear, their food, their discipline. Ammunition seemed unlimited, and the sergeants pushed and pushed Not only marksmanship, but care of weapons, down to the minutest detail. Immelman wondered how the South had held on as long as it had. On the Sunday before the last leg of the march to Fort Kearny resumed, 2 beef critters were slaughtered and the men given an afternoon of rest. That afternoon, B Company had its first contact with the Cheyenne. 3 braves rode into camp at a slow trot, halting where Immelman was turning beef on spits. The Kiowa scouts were sent for to parley with the Cheyenne, who asked for beef and coffee. Immelman watched. There were no smiles or gestures of gratitude. The 3 mounted braves scanned the camp, sneering quietly. The corporal came and passed a sack, the same sack that had covered Willoughby's head, now with coffee and some flour, to a brave, who handed it to an Indian on his right, then dismounted, pointing at the spit of roasting beef. "It ain't even cooked yet. Tell him it ain't ready," Immelman said. Even before the Kiowa had translated, the brave snatched the spit with 10 pounds of dripping roast, mounted his pony, and the 3 trotted slowly out of camp. "Hey, you come back here with my spit, damn you!" Later, Immelman described the event to his messmates, hunkered down around joints of beef. "Just as proud as peacocks they was. That Injun slipped off his pony smooth as silk, he did. Walked over, looked me right in the eye, then lifted the spit. The one holding the biggest roast. And before you knowed it, he was back on that little mount with the 3 of them riding off real slow. Not a fare thee well, kiss my ass, or fuck you. Proud ain't the word for it, no sir." "What kind of rifles did they have?" "Nothing bad, just one old-timey muzzleloader. Stock was held together with cord. The others had bows and mean-looking clubs." "Well," said McGrath, "if that's what they got to fight us with, we might be in good stead. And them little horses wasn't nothing, just ponies. Piss poor horseflesh, if you ask me. Jeb Stuart, he'd eat ponies like them for breakfast." The opinion of the Cheyenne horses abruptly changed 2 days later, when a war party of 30 attacked a detail of 12 men assigned to cut wood as the company made camp by a stream. The mounted attack was superbly coordinated, with a center line of 10, flanked by right and left echelons of 10 each, swooping down on the work detail armed only with axes and hatchets. 2 axe-wielding soldiers were taken down with 9-foot lances, and 3 more down by arrows and war clubs. The Cheyenne archers in motion, shooting from under their horses' necks. The killing and crippling of the initial attack panicked the others, who made a run for the camp about 200 yards away across a small stream. The attackers' left and right flanks joined the center line of skirmish between the stream and the soldiers, who were cut off, though in full view of camp. The braves pressed the attack again with lances and arrows. The screams of the men had alarmed the camp, and men rushed in every direction in a confusion to get to their stacked arms and ammunition pouches. Only the captain, the lieutenant, and the Kiowa scouts had horses, and while the officers mounted quickly, the superior number of the attackers forestalled any counterattack. From their mounts they called orders to the sergeants to form a line of battle and to advance. But the minutes it took to organize the attack defeated its purpose, and 6 of their own lay dead and 6 wounded without a shot fired. Before retreating, the warriors wheeled into 2 perfect circles, the outer rotating clockwise, the inner circle counterclockwise, around the fallen soldiers as smooth as wagon wheels. The warriors waving their weapons, whooping war cries. The circles then broke into 3 units which fanned northward across the plains at a gallop, issuing an occasional war whoop and completely ignoring the firing of rifles from camp. No soldier there had ever seen such dazzling horsemanship. That night pickets were doubled. Immelman and with McGrath and Wharton, his messmates, watched the burial detail. None of the fallen had less than 3 arrows, with 7 in poor Horton, the corporal in charge of the detail. The graves were dug shallow, then covered with stones from the stream bed. No ceremony, no words, no wooden crosses, no Bible readings, just sweat and dirt and fear to attend the leaving of this world. By morning, 2 of the wounded had died and another 2 graves were hastily dug. The 2 Kiowa scouts were gone. Them Comanche rode like they was part of them ponies, jumping. Jesus, I never seen nothing like it, McGrath said. There was this big exhibition at the Jackson camp just before we marched down to Vicksburg. Stewart's cavalry was riding high. They'd captured a shitload of Yankee horses and everything was roses. There was 300 of Jeb's finest, mounted on the very best horseflesh, and I mean the best. They drug artillery pieces and did fence jumping and charges and half a dozen quick change formations, but nothing they did touch what them savages did on those little horses yesterday. My God, how are we supposed to fight that? How come they're sending infantry out here when it's clear as crystal what they need's cavalry? Sergeant says them Cheyenne is the finest horseman ever there was, and they have thousands of ponies, thousands. Do you hear me? Immelman replied that the Union Army wouldn't have sent them if they didn't have a good plan. Look what they're doing to the South. You think these savages stand a chance, McGrath? Your engine pony gonna leap over a palisade? Huh? And if must needs be, they just might send Sherman or Sheridan out here. Then what? Huh? All's I'm saying is anyone gets stuck out on the prairie like those poor darlings and gets rode down on like they was, they're done for. Done for, damn it. Maybe if we had Henrys or Navy Colts, we'd stand a chance, but shit, time you take to reload, you worry too much, Ben. And you love your damn bluebellies too much, Sandy. They're assholes. You ain't learned that yet? Just 'cause they got victuals don't mean you gotta love 'em, boy. And they sure as shit ain't gonna shower no love on us. You forget what they did to Willoughby? And you like being called Galvanized Yankee, huh? That falls sweet on your ears? That night, a full moon shone on the 32 tents. No one slept easy. The doubled-up pickets stayed alert. Immelman dreamed. He and McGrath had the last picket duty on the stream side of the camp and stayed together, pacing the perimeter, watching and listening for sign. And in this dream, they met by a willow thicket to share a smoke an hour before sunup. Before the match used to light the cheroot hit the ground, each man had been grabbed from behind. A blade plunged into Immelman's kidney as McGrath's throat was slashed clean through to his backbone. Immelman's attacker finished him off by plunging the spit taken with the haunch of beef the day before into his eye. This dream put him in a state of fear he could not shake. Daily now, the men of the company saw mounted Indians on the horizon, always at a slow trot. The men marched, shouldered arms with fixed bayonets. Pickets were kept doubled, and the men slept with their rifles. One day's march from Fort Kearny, an escort sent from the fort met the company with the news of Lee's surrender. A buzz went through the ranks immediately. Any disappointment with the news of the surrender among former Confederates was mitigated by the sight of the fort and the assurance of safety. At the post, Galvanized Yankees faced strong resentment from the post cadre, many of whom had transferred west after Gettysburg and the Wilderness. The men of the Company B remained intense. Out of ranks, they were snubbed by their regulars and called Johnny Reb or galvanizers. Once settled into post life, the captain had pitched in with the regulars, allowing Company B to live in tents and to pull the worst duties, digging latrines, hauling water, and standing night watches, while the regulars lived in barracks and escorted wagon trains and mail coaches to Dodge or Fort Pierre. Immelman's single thread of consolation was McGrath. Now, like him, Immelman had come to despise Yankees. In the spring, the company was assigned to cut wood to construct barracks before winter. The trees to be felled were on an island in the Platte. Immelman and McGrath worked a drag chain, hauling trimmed logs to the sawmill which had been set up on the island. With the 2 mules, it was tough work in the heat. One afternoon, The mule stepped on a blind rattler stretched across the path, shedding its skin. The snake, pinned to the ground by the mule's hoof, struck several times, putting the mule out of commission. This invoked the wrath of the corporal irregular in charge of the detail. If you was leading them mules proper instead of straggling behind, Jenny never have stepped on that damn snake. No, it's your fault, McGrath, and yours too, Immelman, you goddamn worthless galvanizers. McGrath and Immelman were charged with dereliction, fined 2 months' pay, and transferred to the trimming crew, working from morning to sunset with barking knives and trimming hatchets. During a lunch break on a particularly hot day, McGrath allowed how he didn't know if he could take much more of this shit. Immelman agreed, and soon the cork popped from the bottle of the idea that had played upon both men's minds for weeks. I am ever so ready to say my farewells to this shithole, Immelman. Might just as well be a pair of mules ourselves the way man gets treated here. Why, they ain't a spark of kindness within 100 miles of this place. I think that's the worst part, man. All the sweet has run out of life. Ain't nothing left but the sours. I can't remember the last time I seen a feller smile. And don't nobody laugh unless he's drunk. I want to see a pretty woman. I want to see children playing. I'd give $50 to hear a baby cry. I want to hear please and thank you and howdy do. I want to hear a piano or a banjo, people singing of an evening. I swear I hate it. I hate it near as bad as the Rock, and a damn sight more than Vicksburg. A man needs some kindness in this world, damn it. That's all I want, a little kindness. Let's cut, Ben. You and me, let's cut. I've been thinking about it ever since punishment. Let's cut. Cut out of this hellhole. I say cut, Ben, do you hear? I'd be lying if I told you I hadn't been thinking the same thing probably longer than you. But I'll tell you what's got me flummoxed is the goddamn Cheyenne, Immelman. I'm scared to death of them devils. And there ain't no way out of Nebraska territory they don't cross 100 miles of Cheyenne. Ben, I've been thinking we could latch ourselves one of those wagon trains heading to Oregon or California. You got any idea how we could get in with one of them wagon masters? An excitement infused McGrath's speech. Let me think it over. Let me think. We can cipher this out, boy. I know we can. Dozens of wagon trains stopped at Fort Kearny each month. Some were trains that had formed up in Missouri or Kentucky or Indiana, and others were lone wagons that had collected together on the trail for protection that numbers afforded. Approaching wagon masters at the fort was too risky. The wagoneers would peach on them for a reward, and once the two failed to show up at muster, patrols would be sent to search for them, and they knew from past desertions that the search of wagons for deserters was the first evolution of the patrols. So the two planned to trek overland 25 or 30 miles west before meeting the wagon trail. We'll only move at night. I reckon we can do at least 10 miles a night, don't you? Them Injuns sleep at nighttime, just like us. And as long as we stay off the trail and are careful about our tracks, we can do it, Sandy. I know we can. On the dark of the moon, the two slipped from their tent with bedrolls, a compass, canteens, their haversacks crammed with food, and $44 between the two. Leaving the post was effortless. They stayed on the main trail where their track would be mingled with the daily traffic. At 3 Mile Creek, they departed the road and headed midstream to the north for a mile. Leaving the stream around midnight, they carefully brushed away their prints and continued north across the plain. They knew the patrol would push west to intercept and search wagons. Just before dawn broke, they bedded down in a coulee. At dusk the next day, they went over the plan. We'll keep northwest for a couple of hours, then about midnight we'll swing back southwest and pick up the wagon trail in a couple of days. An hour into the trek, thunder sounded to the north. The wind picked up, and soon the two were facing into sheets of cold rain and hail. If we left any tracks at all, they's gone by now, partner. This'll draw the patrols back to the post. McGrath, this is crazy, Immelman shouted. We gotta find us somewheres to hole up till this storm passes. Flashes of lightning lit the prairie every few seconds. Now the men felt very small and miserable, and the natural urge for shelter dominated. But there was no safe umbrage. Soon the pair crouched beneath a dead Osage orange tree under their wet blanket. Before sunup, the storm eased into a steady rain, and they rose and slogged west, hoping to find shelter. Trying to ford a rain-swollen ravine, McGrath lost his footing and was swept 50 yards downstream, his bedroll, canteen, and compass lost. Their rations were soaked, the hardtack now a white mush at the bottom of the haversacks. By noon the rain ceased, and the exhausted pair slept naked on the wet ground, their clothes and the one remaining blanket spread out to dry. McGrath woke Immelman just before dark. We gotta get going, boy. I figure we can start south now. However, no North Star shone through the cloud cover, and the pair's third night trek became aimless. Immelman had taken a chill from the drenching and was now plagued every few minutes by a fit of shaking. I can't get warm. We're going to have to build us a fire. I'm afraid I ain't going to make it. No, damn it, Sandy, no fire. Them red devils can smell smoke for 50 miles. Here, wrap up the blanket round you. Come on, boy, you can do this, soldier. Please, Ben, just a little fire, he begged. I couldn't make a fire no ways. There ain't no dry tinder, not a dry twig in this whole damn prairie. An hour before dawn, Immelman sunk to his knees. I can't go no more. I can't go no more, McGrath. I just can't. A fit of shivers hit him, and he went into a coughing fit. All right, Sandy. We'll bunk down here, but no fire. The two huddled under the damp army blanket. Stop your coughing, Sandy. Shush. I heard something. What? Is it a coyote? Some critter? Hush, it's a horse. I heard a horse nicker. It was Two Rabbit's turn to watch the horses that night. The first coughs he heard, he thought, had come from one of the teepees. But when the ponies became nervous and began shifting, he sprang to his feet and sniffed the air. Then he heard the soft whispers somewhere to the left of the hobbled ponies. He eased around the horses and made the outline of the soldier's blanket. 2 minutes later, half a dozen heavy war clubs pounded down upon the pair over and over again, breaking arms, hands, ribs, and heads. The moaning bodies were dragged 30 yards to the center of the Cheyenne encampment and bound. In the morning, Immelman awoke. He forced his swollen eyes open. He lay facing McGrath's hands. All the fingers had been cut off, and only the thumbs remained. Blood trickled from his mouth, which had been sewn shut with sinew. And now a fat squaw cleaved McGrath's face in two with a tomahawk. Two Rabbits was awarded the privilege of scalping Immelman. Only 13 years old, he'd never scalped before, and lacked the finesse of a warrior. Immelman's hair was short from the delousing at Rock Island and gave poor purchase to the boy. With his father's black obsidian knife, he began to cut too far forward and allowed the razor-sharp knife to find its own path. Soon the left upper half of Immelman's face and forehead were peeled back and taken with the scalp. Immelman screamed. When Horse with Wings commented that the exposed eyeball in its socket, along with the screeching, put him in mind of a great white owl, everyone laughed and then left to break camp. Immelman was an hour dying.